A low hum vibrated across the ashen plains, an ever-present reminder of the winds laced with glittering shards that could blind a person in seconds. People called them the crystal winds because the dust carried persistent flecks resembling gemstones. Those glimmers were more than mere illusions of beauty. They were radioactive, carving rashes into human skin, flaying exposed flesh, and, over time, poisoning entire settlements. Marisol sensed them drawing nearer from the pricking at the nape of her neck. The women in her family had a strange sensitivity to the forces of nature, perhaps a trick of ancestral memory or an echo of their years tracking weather patterns. It felt almost like a magnet was pulling her hair upward, or a current coursed through her body in small pulses. She let out a long breath and looked eastward, toward the band of swirling dust that had begun to churn on the horizon. Even in the fading evening light, ribbons of luminous crystals could be spotted flickering in the haze. Behind her, the caravan stood in disarray, a ramshackle line of rusted vehicles, tarpaulin carts, and battered livestock wagons. A few mechanical beasts that still struggled to function, ancient harvesters retrofitted to carry supplies, chugged wearily at the boundary. The migrants, old and young alike, moved with frenzied purpose. They shoved crates of dried foods, coops of scrawny chickens, and their meager personal belongings onto whichever wagon had a square inch of free space left. They had to get away. This was the last hour before the crystal winds tore through their present campsite, reducing it to a mass of shimmering wreckage. "Hurry," Marisol called to a little boy and his grandmother, who were trying to push a patched-up trunk of clothing onto a cart. "Move to the center. We're grouping the vehicles in a circle for shelter. We must seal the tarps before dark." The grandmother nodded with a look of weary gratitude. The boy, eyes wild, stared at the horizon, transfixed by eerie lights dancing in the sky. He had dark hair matted with dust, and a slash of dirt streaked across his face. His hands clutched the cart's handle with trembling determination. They weren't the only frightened ones. Everywhere Marisol looked, she saw frantic movements. Sparks flew from spanners that hammered protective plates in place. Mothers wrapped bandanas around their children's faces, pressing plastic goggles over their eyes. Fathers and uncles roped down anything that might blow away once the howling gusts began. Standing guard was Alias, the caravan's leader. He was 40 years old, weathered by more storms than most caravans combined. A wide crescent scar slashed across his forehead, gained years ago when a cluster of crystals cut through an old homestead's roof. He wore that scar like a badge of survival. Marisol hurried over to him, her bare feet stirring up dust. She mostly avoided boots because she needed to feel the subtle vibrations in the earth, an eccentric quirk, but it had kept her group safe time after time. Elias raised a hand in greeting. "You're coming strong tonight," he said, voice low and burdened. He wore a cloth wrapped around his mouth to filter out the airborne toxicity. She nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. "I felt it all day. The crystals in the air are thicker than usual. Even the animals are growing restless." He reached out to the mechanical harvester behind him. Its motor hissed in low complaint, as if anticipating the incoming bombardment. "If our machines fail, we'll have to rely on the beasts," he said grimly. "I had the kids gather all the pack donkeys. This time, we might need each and every one of them." The horizon rumbled with a dusty roar as the last vestiges of daylight faded into a blood-orange sky. Already, swirling sparks glinted like 1,000 daggers. Marisol's heart pounded. They needed to move at daybreak, but first they had to survive the storm that would strike that very night. She parted ways with Elias and made rounds through the camp, ensuring the caravans were sealed and that families huddled with their precious rations. Tarps had been sewn together from old plastic sheets, reinforced with netting to keep crystals from slicing them apart. Water barrels were lashed in place under a battered bus skeleton. Precious fuel and jerry cans nestled deep within a wagon bed, padded with blankets and clothing to protect them from shattering shards. In the half-dark, every face looked tense, all eyes pinned on the roiling spark-strewn horizon. When the winds finally arrived, they came with a ravenous howl. Gusts of grit and sharp crystals sliced the tarps, threatening to tear them from their moorings. Cries rang out as people fought to hold the coverings in place against the punishing barrage. Marisol hunkered down inside the largest cargo truck with two other families, each one peering wide-eyed at the storm raging outside. Even through the closed doors, shimmering flecks spiraled in through the cracked windshield, landing on the floor in a poisonous heap. Little by little, the protective barriers gave way. Sharp blasts tore holes in the roof. Ice-cold dread knotted in Marisol's stomach. She grabbed a wooden plank, fracturing it off a makeshift bench, and jammed it over a breach. The crystals settled on the plank's surface, melting into a glittering residue that hissed faintly. The truck's interior became unbearably hot, and her lungs seemed to seize at the thickening air. It felt like hours before the wind gradually lessened. At some point, Marisol drifted into a shaky half-sleep, waking periodically to the ominous scratch of sand and glass. When the sun finally cast a sickly yellow glow across the plains, she heard distant caws. Vultures, perhaps, or mutated crows, signaling that the storm was over. She stepped outside, stiff and exhausted, to find the caravan site transformed. Several carts had overturned, tarps shredded along their frames. Broken planks lay strewn in all directions. The shimmering after effects of the storm coated the ground and vehicles, making them glimmer in the light. But that same iridescent layer could kill within days if it seeped into injuries or water supplies. Marisol's chest tightened at the sight of a battered pickup with an entire side torn off. She spotted Elias guiding a half-collapsed donkey cart upright, cursing under his breath. A handful of survivors clustered around, rubbing at their eyes with bandaged hands. People coughed, their battered lungs raw from inhaling radioactive dust. Still, they were alive, and that was something to hold on to. She found a rag and dipped it into a battered wash basin to scrub off the crystal residue on her arm. The water stung her cracked skin, but she pressed on, mindful of the risk. Above all, she had to check on the others. She navigated the debris while her bare toes scuffed the irradiated surface. Across the settlement, children sniffled and clung to parents, trembling. People wiped crystals off tarps, rummaging for salvageable supplies. The donkeys brayed nervously, but seemed otherwise intact. A single mechanical harvester still idled, its fuel gauge nearly empty. Now more than ever they needed to find a safer place, ideally a zone north of the storms, where rumors of more hospitable lands circulated. Favorable farmland, some claimed, hidden behind a chain of old mountains. Or maybe it was all rumor. In times like these, rumor was hope. By mid-morning, Elias called everyone to gather near a battered cargo truck. His voice shook with fatigue. "We have no choice but to move. That was only the first wave for this lunar cycle. New storms will hit us again in a few days. We must get beyond that ridge." He pointed at the jagged peaks dimly visible in the far distance. "I'm told the crystals don't easily cross high terrains. If it's safer, so be it. We'll find the pass, cross it, and make for the rumored farmland." Murmurs rippled among the group. A tall man with hollow cheeks and a salvaged shotgun stepped forward. "That pass is rumored to be blocked by old landslides. The route might be impassable." A wiry woman with braided hair, her face streaked with dried blood, spat on the ground. "Better to try our luck than sit here and be crushed by the next storm." Elias nodded. "We go at first light tomorrow. Gather everything you can, tear down anything that isn't worth carrying. We pool resources and get these caravans moving." Night fell without further calamity, giving them precious hours to prepare. By the time dawn arrived, the tortured caravan marched forward. Battered trucks, donkey carts, even a few rickshaws. Marisol walked with a scarf knotted around her mouth to block the swirling dust. Trusting her bare feet to feel out hazard, the caravan inched across a panorama of cracked earth and bleached rubble. Ancient highways eroded into fragments long ago, leaving only twisted metal skeletons and remnants of melted asphalt. Glossy shards of crystal occasionally drifted in the breeze. Each time a swirl of those betraying sparkles appeared, people ducked behind their vehicles, cursing the toxic wind. They pressed on more quickly afterward, determined to leave the worst behind. 2 days passed in this manner. Water grew scarce, forcing them to ration so strictly that throats scratched in thirst. Some children cried incessantly, and parents coaxed them with precious sips of brackish water. Grit collected beneath every eyelid, blistered skin broke open and wept. Yet the mountainous ridge they aimed for remained a stubborn silhouette in the distance. On the third day, they came upon a gutted settlement hugging the dusty foothills. The remnants of concrete buildings stood half buried in drifting sand. Rusty signs with half-legible writing jutted out of the rubble. A half-destroyed water tower rose from the horizon, bent in the middle like a wounded beast. The tower's tank had split open years ago, leaving behind twisted metal beams. No sign of current inhabitants, just a scattering of bleached bones near the ruined walls. Elias lifted a hand to halt the caravan. "We'll see if there's anything left to scavenge," he announced. People spread out in wary groups, picking through collapsed buildings. Marisol ventured into a storehouse with supplies stenciled in large, weathered letters. She picked her way through shattered crates, half buried in drifted sand. She uncovered a rusted can with the label peeled away, shook it lightly, and guessed it might contain beans or perhaps something else. What remained of the building smelled stale, a mixture of rot and old metal. Crystal residue glittered in corners where broken windows once let storms rage through. As she emerged, she saw a few men carrying salvaged items: a tattered bag of rice, some corroded metal tools, a meager handful of bottled water. It wasn't much, but it could be the difference between survival and starvation. A quiet hush lay over the settlement, broken only by the shifting of sand. Then she heard a cry echo from the far end of the street. A young woman rushed out of a half-collapsed diner, hands pressed to her mouth. From inside came another shout, urgent and laced with panic. Marisol darted toward them, adrenaline flooding her senses. Inside the diner, shards of broken glass littered the floor. A figure lay sprawled near a dusty booth, breathing hoarsely. His clothes were ripped, revealing a bloody patch on his thigh. 2 caravan members hovered over him, rummaging for bandages. "Carver," gasped one of them, referencing the man's name. "He stepped on some debris. There was a shard of crystal that went straight into his leg." Marisol crouched down to see a thin sliver of that distinctive luminous dust embedded deep in Carver's flesh. She pressed a cloth to the wound, mindful that the crystal's radioactivity would seep in, if not carefully removed. The man's eyes were wide with pain. She fought the urge to recoil from the shimmering sliver. "We need a kit, now," she ordered. A teenage girl thrust a small medical pouch at her. Inside were tweezers, a flask of antiseptic, and a syringe left over from a time before. With gentle, steady hands, Marisol watched for the angle of entry and extracted the shard, carefully placing it in a metal dish to keep it from further contamination. Then she doused the wound with antiseptic, ignoring Carver's ragged scream. The smell of burned wound ointment filled her nostrils. She worked methodically, focusing on each step. When she finished, she sewed the wound with shaky stitches. Tears tracked down Carver's face, though he tried to remain stoic. Elias arrived with a few others, scanning the situation. "We can't remain long," he cautioned, hooking a thumb toward the windows. "This place is riddled with crystals from older storms. Air's toxic." They fashioned a makeshift stretcher from 2 broom handles and an old carpet, then hoisted Carver onto it. Moments later, the caravan was on the move again, salvage supplies lashed to donkey carts. The crumbling settlement faded behind them, an echo of the countless towns swallowed by nature's wrath. By the time they reached the steep slopes leading to the mountain pass, Carver was feverish, along with a handful of others. They had begun showing signs of crystal poisoning, trembling limbs, inflamed lesions on their skin, eyes reddening with each breath of tainted air. Marisol shared whatever herbal treatment she'd collected from the elders. She ground leaves and roots into poultices, hoping to ease the worst of the symptoms. Yet the mountains offered their own set of challenges. The once paved roads had long since cracked and vanished under rock slides. Boulders blocked passages, forcing them to go on foot and tug their carts behind them with ropes. Some old tunnels were rumored to exist, but half had caved in. The group trudged upward in single file, stepping gingerly across precarious ledges that crumbled beneath their feet. Days wore on under a merciless sun. Dust storms, though not as severe as the crystal winds, still battered them with swirling grit. Several times they had to double back, discovering a rock wall was impassable or a trail ended in a sheer drop. The children grew weak from hunger. Food rations dipped close to nothing, though occasionally they found mountain goats or small roving creatures. One scrawny goat was enough to feed many people with a thin stew, if they collected enough water first. But water itself was rarer than ever. Even streams that trickled from the rock faces often ran with faint crystal residue. Nevertheless, the higher they climbed, the fewer crystals drifted on the wind. Occasionally, Marisol caught glimpses of green in the distance, patches of scrub or hardy weeds clinging to the rocky slopes. It woke a small spark of hope that perhaps, on the other side, they might find more substantial growth. Everyone knew the old saying, in the wastelands, a single leaf can mean a forest is waiting. Every altitude gain tested their remaining mechanical harvester, which spewed black smoke from its battered engine. At times the wheels spun on loose gravel, requiring teams to push. More than once the engine coughed and nearly died, but the group coaxed it along, praying it would hold out until the final stretch. On the 5th day of their climb, the sky grew heavy with clouds. A cold wind swept the narrow trail. Marisol shivered under her thin poncho. She and Elias paused near an outcropping of jagged stone. Far below, the desert plains glowed faintly in diffuse sunlight, dotted with swirling dust devils. The crystal winds had returned down there, painting the horizon a menacing purple-tinged swirl. They had indeed outpaced the worst of the storms. Still, crossing the pass remained uncertain. "We'll summit tomorrow," Elias said, scanning the ridge that loomed overhead. "Looks like the trail narrows further up, but if we can get the caravans through, we'll be on the downslope by nightfall." Marisol nodded, amazed at how close they had come. "I can't tell if we'll find better land on the other side," she murmured, "but anything is better than what we left behind." Elias gave a faint, tired smile. "We'll endure. We always do." Sure enough, by midday the next day, the caravan reached the crest of the mountain pass. From there, the land spread out below, a basin ringed by tall ridges. At first it looked rocky and barren, yet as they descended, glimpses of stubborn green patches became more frequent. Scraggly bushes, small stands of grass. Though it wasn't lush farmland, it was life, and that was more promising than the ravaged plains behind them. The group pressed on, hearts lifting. The air was thinner, but it smelled less poisonous. Fewer crystalline sparks drifted on the breezes. Marisol exhaled a relief-laden breath, imagining the scorching crystals far behind them. Perhaps here they could rest a moment. They reached a narrow canyon floor where a trickle of water ran along the rocks. People rushed forward, cupping hands or metal bowls to gather the precious liquid. Elias tested it with a battered Geiger counter that gave a reassuringly low. A cheer rose, though hushed and cautious, as the travelers realized they'd found drinkable water. They set up a small camp, soaked their blistered feet, allowed children to splash, albeit timidly, while watchful eyes scanned for danger. Days went by with no sign of storms. They mended their tattered clothing, patched vehicles, and treated the sick as best they could with herbs found in the crags. Carver's fever broke, leaving him weak but alive. Some of the older travelers, newly rejuvenated, scouted deeper into the basin. They found a plateau dotted with weather-worn structures, ruins of a time before, made from thick stone that had withstood the apocalypse better than the flimsy concrete or metal constructions. A few half-standing walls hinted they might serve as partial shelter. Marisol accompanied one scouting party. They followed an old cobblestone path, vines creeping across broken stones underfoot. The place had a faint mystique, as if it had once been a secret retreat. A fallen archway lay half-buried in the ground, with intricate patterns carved into it. Reconnaissance yielded a few rooms still intact, their roofs braced with wooden timbers that refused to collapse. There were signs of a small stream at the far end of the plateau, running into a rock basin that might supply water. Elias and the rest of the caravan arrived later, forging a makeshift village amid the ruin. Here, the swirling dust of crystals was all but absent, blocked by tall peaks that disrupted the winds. Patient survival work began in earnest. People dug trenches to funnel water from the stream to a central reservoir. They erected barricades of stone, combining them with pieces from salvaged wagons to protect the settlement from smaller storms that might blow through occasionally. Families claimed corners of the ancient foundation for living spaces, patching up walls with tarps, boards, and metal sheets. The transformation slowly turned the plateau into a place they might call home. One afternoon, Marisol explored deeper into the remnants of this hidden fortress. Behind one collapsed building, she found a courtyard where wild grass had taken root. It wasn't thick or tall, but the vibrant green colors startled her in the otherwise gray-brown world. She crouched and let her fingertips brush the soft blades, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. Her entire life had been shaped by fleeing storms and scouring for scraps. The bizarre notion of planting seeds here, actually growing food in place, felt simultaneously foreign and thrilling. As she rose, she felt a presence behind her. Elias stood under the arch of a broken doorway, arms crossed. "Quite something, isn't it?" he said quietly. She nodded, heart swelling. "If we care for this land, it might sustain us, even if it's just enough to keep us alive." A faint smile played across his lips. "We'll clear away any crystal residue that drifts in, build protective barriers. The storm shouldn't reach us as strongly on this side of the mountains." He walked closer, stooping to run his hand across the grass. "I never thought I'd see a place like this again." At dusk that same day, the caravanners decided to hold a small gathering. They built a makeshift circle of stones and broken crates, lighting a small fire at the center. People took seats, passing around what meager rations they still had, a sampling of salvaged beans and dried goat meat. Children huddled close, eyes bright. Carver, propped on a wooden crutch, told stories of his younger days. Others shared legends about old times, before the planet turned sour. Marisol listened, letting the crackle of the fire fill her mind. She glanced upward at the night sky. In the desert plains, they'd rarely been able to watch the stars without fear of swirling crystal dust. Here, though, the stars shone with unusual clarity. She could pick out constellations she'd heard of only in tales. A hush of wonder fell among them as they gazed upward, rediscovering a lost piece of humanity's heritage. In the days that followed, work began in earnest. The caravanners dug channels for irrigation, using metal scraps to create sluices. They cleared rubble from the stone structures, shaping them into livable spaces. Whenever a wind gust carried glimmers of crystal, scouts sounded a warning, and people retreated indoors until it disengaged. But mostly they found respite from the swirling horrors they had endured for so long. Some even spoke of raising small fields of grains. The seeds in the battered caravans, once a distant hope, were carefully planted in newly tilled soil under watchful eye. Recovering from the trauma of constant flight wasn't easy. Some nights families still woke in panic at the slightest whistle of wind, fearing that the caravan had to pack up and flee. Others found it hard to trust the new environment, expecting at any moment it would vanish in a swirl of lethal crystals. Yet, day by day, the settlement grew stronger. The mechanical harvester, thoroughly repaired, was repurposed to help extend a series of irrigation ditches. With Carver's health improving, he contributed by reinforcing structures with scrap metal panels. Children ran through the courtyard, chasing each other with squeals of laughter that had been silent for too long. Spring, or what passed for spring in these times, brought gentle breezes and the occasional drizzle. Enough water fell to fill small rain catchers. The earthen reservoir slowly accumulated enough to irrigate the tiny fields of sprouting crops. A fragile but tangible sense of optimism spread throughout the group. One late afternoon, Marisol returned from gathering herbs in a nearby ravine. She'd found a cluster of medicinal plants that could help treat crystal burns and fevers. Clutching a bundle of them in her arms, she trudged back toward the settlement. As she rounded the corner leading into the plateau, she caught a glimpse of the horizon. Dark clouds roiled above distant peaks, but they did not glimmer with the sickly sheen of crystals, just normal storm clouds, heavy with moisture. She breathed in the slightly humid air. "Real rain," she murmured, a disbelieving smile tugging at her lips. Elias emerged from one of the newly stabilized buildings, scanning the sky with cautious hope. "We'd do well to gather more containers," he advised. If it's truly a proper storm, we can store enough water for months. Marisol nodded. Giving him half her bundle of herbs, she rushed off to help prepare. The thunderheads rolled closer, bringing with them a gust of cooler wind. Soon rain hammered down in thick sheets. She joined a group of children and elders, linking together buckets and plastic drums next to the stone walls to catch every precious drop. As the water ricocheted off the ground, it seemed to wash away the memories of drifting glass shards and scorching dust. People ran into the open air, letting rain mingle with tears of awe. Children shrieked with delight, dancing in puddles. Adults turned their faces skyward, arms outstretched. Elias stood beside Marisol, soaked through but grinning. "It's not a miracle," he said, voice edged with emotion. "But it's close enough," she laughed, letting raindrops trickle over her cheeks. "I'll take it," she whispered. The downpour lasted nearly an hour, then faded into a soft drizzle. Pools formed across the plateau, reflecting the last rays of evening light. A rainbow shimmered in the sky, arching across the newly washed air. For a moment, it felt as if the world they had known before, scarred by swirling storms and migrating caravans, no longer existed. In the days and weeks that followed, the settlement took root in earnest. Fields sprouted tender shoots, fed by both irrigation and natural rainfall. The donkey herds returned to calmer routines, grazing upon patches of wild grass. People shaped a communal space near the water's edge, constructing a low stone wall around it. Laughter, once a rare commodity, echoed among the new huts. Wooden boards replaced tarps as they gradually sourced salvageable lumber. Walls thickened, layered with clay to insulate against the brisk mountain nights. Marisol's sensitivity to the crystal winds never entirely vanished. At times, she felt a tingling at the back of her neck, her senses remembering the storms that had so frequently harassed them. But as the months passed, those dreaded winds did not come. Whenever she felt a faint prickle of electricity, she realized it was only a fleeting gust that carried a fraction of the old dust. Nothing like the storms that once threatened to flay them alive. Though they knew the crystals still haunted the plains beyond the mountains, they found sanctuary in their hidden basin. Life remained hard, but no longer a hopeless daily fight for survival. Curiosity replaced dread. They experimented with seeds passed down through countless caravans, coaxing new life from the battered soil. Bright blossoms occasionally emerged, defying the brutal environment. When a traveler from another caravan eventually stumbled upon their settlement, emaciated, eyes dulled by hardship, he discovered a place he never imagined could exist. After he recovered his strength, he decided to stay. As did others who followed, the settlement evolved, weaving new arrivals into the patchwork of community. Over time, they learned better ways to fortify the pass and scavenge for old world treasures. Step by cautious step, a new chapter of human resilience unfolded. On a quiet morning, Marisol stood atop the rocky escarpment overlooking what had become a thriving refuge. The dwellings lay nestled against the ancient stone walls, the mountain range towering behind them like a protective guardian. Children's voices carried on the light breeze, and the donkey bells clanged softly in the pasture. She gazed into the distance, recalling the days she had first felt the tinkle of an oncoming storm. So many miles and so many hardships behind them. She cast her mind back to the caravans, the swirling dust, the frantic scrambles to secure tarps and precious supplies. An echo of that fear still remained inside her, but there was also a new resolve born out of what they had accomplished. Yes, the world remained dangerous. Yes, the future held no guarantees. Yet here, in this sheltered corner, they had carved out safety, maybe even a chance at renewal. Elias joined her, standing quietly at her side. Without words, they both felt the weight of the path that led them here. Neither missed the constant migrations nor the blackening storms that had stolen their loved ones. Now the vantage point offered a gentler horizon, and it was enough. Though the crystal winds might someday breach even these mountains, for now the settlement endured, and in enduring dared to hope.